Good morning, everyone, and welcome to Manitoba Agriculture and Resource Development CropTalk webinar series. If you have any questions today during the presentation, please type them into the questions section of the GoToWebinar menu, and we will answer them at the end of the presentation. This webinar is being recorded, and you will receive a link to the recording. Thank you.
Thanks, Laurie. I'd like to welcome everybody to the July 22nd edition of CropTalk. On today's agenda, we have going to go through the cropping conditions, and then we haven't talked a lot about sunflowers this year, and right now sunflowers are kind of getting into the stage where we need to be taking a closer look at them. So I thought I'd go through a few slides on sunflowers and talk a little bit about what we should be looking for and watching for in that crop. And then from there on, we'll be going to our crop scouting panel, and we've got some questions that have come through during the week, as well as we'll be taking questions as they come in. So to start with, let's talk a little bit about the chart I always like to use. It's our weather report, and I use the Southwest, but I'm going to try to talk as much in general as I can here. But I think the biggest thing we've been seeing over the last while is the amount of rainfall that's been hitting not just the Southwest region, but the Northwest. The Interlake maybe not quite as much, but they've been getting some areas that have been receiving rainfall, and then the Central and the Eastern regions have been getting their fair share of rain as well. So when we look at the percentage of normal for the Southwest here, the majority of the areas are well above their percentage of normal, but you do see some pockets where we are not quite at normal or well below normal. And I'll just give you an example there. If you look at Minto and scroll across, they're only 48% of normal. But when you look at Killarney, they're at 71% of normal. So an area right through there which has been just missing the rains. And and I think that's reflective throughout the province, where we're getting areas that are receiving almost 1.5 times their normal, and areas which are just around that 70% of normal. With that, you look at our growing degree days and our corn heat units. I think that's been helping us get some of this crop, and I'm getting several comments from producers that the crop is growing really fast and catching up really fast, and that's probably a lot to do with our growing degree days and our corn heat units. We haven't, it doesn't seem like we've been getting lots of hot days, but we've been getting lots of days where the temperature has been, in that mid-20 range sort of thing, low 20s, and those have been accumulating for us. So a little bit of a tour through the crops, and a little bit of discussion as they're doing, how they're coming along. Fall rye is turning in most areas, and the crop is like fall rye normally is. It's kind of variable. Some areas the crop looks great, some area looks a little bit thinner, but in general, I would say the crop looks to be average. I was in a field the other day and was starting to see a little bit of ergot show up, not a whole bunch, which is a good thing. And but yeah, overall, I would say an average crop and starting to turn. Winter wheat in most areas has completed filling. Some areas it's actually starting to turn already, and the crop looks to be average. I've seen some fields that I would probably say are above average, but in general, I think the crop is average, and it seems to be holding on for disease issues. It's keeping its upper leaves fairly clean so far, so I think we're probably past the stage now where any leaf disease would do any major effects to winter wheat. One crop that has been having a great season from the start anyways is peas. Most of the fields now are either filling the pod or in full pod stage. I guess the biggest issue now is it had such a great early part of the season. Now with all the rains, it seems to be playing a toll on a lot of the wheat crops. A lot of the wet areas are basically drowned out and are dying off and ripening prematurely, and we're even seeing that stretch out into some of the other areas of the field. So those spots are actually getting bigger. As if you were to compare it to some of the canola crops, for example, that seem to have isolated that wet spot and are growing good right up to the wet spot. As peas, the area seems to be getting larger as the peas start to mature. Cereal crops, maybe I'll go through them one at a time here. I think our wheat crops are looking pretty good. I would say, if anything, they're average to maybe the potential to be a little bit above average right now. One thing I did notice in a couple of fields this past week is, and I took some pictures here, you could see where the disease is starting to show up on some of the leaves. Now, I wasn't 100% sure if this field was sprayed or not, but it's definitely showing disease on a lot of the leaves, basically looking at tan spot and septoria showing up. Heads were filling, so you know, it's probably we're in a situation that even if the crop or the leaves look like this, we're probably in a situation where a lot of those heads will still develop and fill. But again, we do have pretty much perfect conditions for the disease to spread with the wet conditions and the high humidity. When you look at barley, that crop is looking really good. I've been in about 3 or 4 fields lately, and really good head development I've noticed this year. One thing I have noticed is that producers that didn't use a seed treatment we're seeing smut and fairly easy in those fields where a seed treatment wasn't used. So that might be one of the issues that shows up. Leaf disease wise, most of the fields I've been in are pretty good so far. But again, as we get later on in the season here, I would imagine those diseases are going to start showing up and start to take over some of the leaves. When you look at oats, the oat crop has grown substantially. I've been in lots of fields where the crop is anywhere from 5 feet tall to maybe even a little bit taller, and really good panicle development. We are seeing a few things in the oats with maybe some of the panicles not fully filling, and I think we have a question later on as in the panel as we go on with that one. The Fusarium head blight risk map, I guess might be past the point or we are past the point in most fields where spraying for Fusarium is going to be any help right now. Basically, we're past the stage. But the map still shows us in a lot of areas of being anywhere from high to moderate for the risk for head blight happening. Now, one of the things where we may see this become a little bit more of an issue as the crop develops is we may see some issues in barley as we go on. Conditions are definitely still there, so maybe some of those barley heads that are more susceptible might be ones that start showing a little bit more Fusarium and as we go on. The canola crop, and as I travel, I see more and more canola fields this year that I think that I've seen in a long time. So I think I'm not 100% sure, but just from my travels, I think the acres are definitely high this year. I'm thinking right now, or I'm seeing right now, a lot of the early seeded canola fields are going out of bloom, and a lot of the later seeded canola fields are in full flower. So again, for spraying for disease, in most cases we're past the point, unless it is a fairly late sown crop. We still might have some options, but in general, spraying for fungicide or spraying for disease in canola, we are past the point. One thing, and I did mention this before, is that most of the low-lying areas and a lot of fields have drowned out, but the canola seems to have responded and come back in a lot of the areas bordering those wet spots, and they're starting to come back and are going to produce something. So as compared to I mentioned the peas, where it seems to still be extending into the field, where the canola, it seems to be reducing it right to where the water is in a lot of those areas. And the other thing that I've been noticing in canola is when you look at the plants and pull some plants and look on the, especially right now on the main stem, as I'm noticing a lot of pods are filling, there's pods everywhere where a flower was, or in the majority of the cases, very few abortions of the pods. And that was a bit of a concern with a lot of the weather we were having, whether it be hot at sometimes, or whether the high winds and strong rains would have maybe affected that. But a lot of the fields I've been in, we're seeing good pod development. So that's a good favor for helping us out with the yield. With the moisture we have now, I think a lot of the canola crop has the ability to fill those pods. And the only thing that would maybe reduce that is if we got some extreme heat. With canola, I think it's time that we've talked about this in several of our couple of our webinars already, but I think now is the time that we need to be out there scouting for whether it be for diamondback moth or Bertha armyworm. I think right now is the time to get out there and, if anything, get ourselves accustomed to looking for the damage and recognizing the damage and being able to make assessments. And so some areas in the province had fairly high numbers in the trap counts, but I guess just a reminder that if even though you may have had low trap counts in your area, doesn't mean that you may not have an outbreak or an issue. So use the trap counts as a starting point, but definitely be out there and be checking for both of these insects and seeing what type of damage they're doing if they are there. Soybeans. Soybeans have been handling the wet conditions probably one of probably the best of a lot of the crops I've been seeing. And I think it maybe depended a little bit on the stage of your soybeans. Anything that was maybe sown a little bit later and then the rains came kind of early on them, I think they're maybe stunted a little bit right now, and they're trying to grow through it. The plants are still there, the plants are still growing. It's just that they're not quite as fully developed as some of the other fields. One of the things I'm seeing right now is we're definitely in full flower, and we're actually starting to see pods develop on the lower parts of the plants, at least in the southwest here. Lower to mid parts of the plant, we're seeing pods develop. And one of the things about the moisture we have been getting, when you look at the chart here, anywhere from the beginning of July through to the second week of August is probably the time when soybeans will use most of their moisture, or need most of their moisture, to help develop and help to fill the pods. So right now with soybeans, we're probably good for a couple weeks without a rain, but it sure would be good to get another rain probably in that second to third week of August, just to help them finish filling the pods. So rainfall for them isn't critical right now, but in a couple of weeks would probably be nice to get a shower. Flax is blooming, and some producers have been spraying to control pasmo. We talked a bit about the disease last week, and you can see some browning in some of the leaves in flax. Flax hasn't been handling the wet conditions very well. Some fields, when you go out there, the crop is severely yellowed, and in a lot of cases, producers are wondering if they should be spending a lot more money on it regarding fungicide. And it's a good question they need to ask themselves. There is some fields that are doing okay, and I think again it's the fields that were sown early and were able to get their heads and the roots, kind of the heads above water, and the roots were deep enough and developed enough that they can handle the wet soil conditions, were the ones that are looking fairly good right now. We see some of the later seeded fields that just didn't have the good root development yet, and aren't able to handle the amounts of moisture we got, that are yellowing and severely stunting some of the growth, and definitely going to have an effect on yield. One other thing we need to be keeping our eye out for right now is grasshoppers. I haven't seen a lot of issues in the Southwest here. However, there has been reports of grasshoppers doing damage to some of the crops and some of the fields around. There's been some spraying being done, but yes, so we definitely need to be watching out for grasshoppers. And one of the things that I think would be producers should be watching for is that as the forage crops start coming off, the grasshoppers are going to be moving out into other crops. So I think there's something we should be watching for that as we go through. So that was a little bit of an update on the crops and how the crops have been advancing throughout the area and the province. I think right now in general we're looking at an average to maybe slightly above average crop right now. I think several areas that needed the rain have gotten some rain, and there's still some isolated places that do need rain, but I think in general the crop is looking fairly good. So a little bit of talk about sunflowers now. It's a crop that we don't grow a lot of acres in the province of, but we still have our core growers, and this is the time of year where they're gearing up for a couple of things. One is controlling Sclerotinia in sunflowers, and we're right now just in the stage where fungicide application is kind of right on the cusp of happening, when 80% of the field reaches the R5 stage. And the R5 stage is when you can just start seeing the flowers starting to open up. So sort of like the picture on the top there, and maybe just a little bit before that. And usually within 2 to 5 days after, you'll see the flower opening up. And so that's when your timeline for spraying is best. And what are we looking at when we're looking for controlling Sclerotinia? Well, we're looking at a couple things. We get the stem rot with Sclerotinia and the sunflowers, and what will happen there is a lot of times the stalks, as the plant develops, it gets too heavy and the stem can't hold it up, so we get breaking of the stem. You'll see these in the field fairly easy, and when you open up the stem, you'll see a lot of the sclerotia bodies inside, and if you look close at the picture there, you could actually see some of them there. And the other way Sclerotinia affects the head, the crop, is it affects the head. And when that happens, what you'll do a lot of times is the plant will still be there and sturdy. It's just the head will be affected, and you'll get sclerotia bodies actually showing up in your sample, and that's when you get that downgrading, and you get it's hard to separate some of that from the regular sunflower seeds. So again, mainly a lot of confection producers would be spraying for Sclerotinia, and some oil guys do as well. When you're looking at sunflowers also at this time, we're also looking at some insects that might be doing some damage or can cause some damage to the sunflower. The first one we'll talk about is the banded sunflower moth. Best time for controlling it, again, is in the R5.1. And when you see the R5, that's the R5 stage. And when you see the 1, that's 10% flowering. And it'll go up from 1 through to 9, depending on percentage of flowering completed on the head. So the best time to control the banded sunflower moth is in the R5.1. The moths are most active in the evening or early mornings, and they'll lay the eggs on the bracts of the sunflower head. Once they do that, it takes about 5 to 8 days for those eggs to hatch. The larvae will move from the bracts and start feeding on the flower. If the head is developing and you're getting seed development already happening during the later stages of development, the larvae, they'll tunnel into the seed and they'll make a hole usually on the top. So if you could see the one on the right hand side here, you can see the hole on the top. That's the larvae that would have crawled in. And each larvae, can destroy anywhere from 6 to 7 seeds. And what will happen again is it's a quality factor, especially in confections, and a downgrading factor. So how should you scout for them? Well, the best way is to either go in early mornings or late evenings, because that's when they're most active. Get in off the headland and then count about 20 plants at each of your stops. And if you're getting numbers like 1 moth per plant, that's pretty close to your economic threshold. So if you're getting 1 moth per 2 plants, you should be looking at maybe some control measures. The other one we're going to look at is the Lagus bug on sunflowers. And again, controlling of it is in the early flowering stage. So again, the R5.1. They do a little bit different effects to the seed. They actually get in and they chew on the seed, and they leave an enzyme behind on the seed that makes the sunflower seed bitter. I'm sure we've all tasted those sometimes when we are eating sunflower seeds. Basically, again, a worry for confection sunflowers that are going to be for human consumption. Look at the picture here. You see the adult, really distinct way of identifying them with the V on the back. A little bit earlier on, you got the nymph, which is a little greenish in color, and the damage to the seeds. So you can see the damage here where they are definitely affecting the quality. So from worrying about insects that are going to affect the seed quality, there's another insect that's fairly common, and it's the sunflower beetle. And with that one, you're more concerned about defoliation. And a lot of times we're probably a little bit concerned, just before the head develops, and we're looking at the damage to the leaves, and we're looking at defoliation. So a lot of times with the sunflower beetle, what you're looking at is how much damage is done to the leaves, because you need the leaves to help fill the head. And so sort of the same kind of methodology as you would when you would be looking at flea beetle control in canola. Anytime that you're looking at 25 to 30% defoliation, you're getting to the point where control might be needed. But I think what you need to watch is just like we do in canola, if the plant is growing actively and you're getting good leaf development, they can handle a fair bit of damage before you need to worry about any insect control. One thing about sunflowers is when you're looking at controlling insects, seed yield is also seed yield and seed set, and even seed oil percentage increase when you have the pollinators in the field. So you want to aim to maximize these benefits. And we know what our pollinators are, bees, and they're like out there working fairly hard, and we don't need to be spraying these ones out. So we want to keep our beneficials out there. So I think the big thing you should do is if you're going to be applying insecticide to flowering sunflowers, you need to spray late in the day when the bees have left the field and aren't foraging anymore, and try to pick an insecticide that'll be less harmful to the pollinators. And there are several in the book you can look at in our field guide to crop protection. Okay, so with that, I've kind of finished the update, and I see that I'm just gonna check if there's a question here. Okay, yeah. Actually, when we were talking back at the beginning regarding accumulated our growing degree days, we've also have the benefit of having some warm evenings, which have definitely helped. And what we're seeing is a lot of the crop is actually growing on almost like a 24-hour a day, which is definitely beneficial to getting the crop growing. So thanks for that comment. Okay, going to go into some of the questions, and the first question is, I was in a couple pea fields this week, and some of the producers were starting to wonder what the peas are going to yield, and we were looking at them. So I'm going to throw a question out to Dennis Lang. Is there a way of, or is there a method of determining or predicting yield at this time of year?
Yeah, thanks, Lionel. Can you throw the screen over to me real quick?
Sure. Laurie, can you do that, please?
Alrighty, we're just going to go full screen here. Okay, so this is always a question I get every year, especially when a crop starts looking real good. So when we look at a field like this, we see, really good potential. There's still some flowers left yet, but corner to corner looks pretty good. This field to me looks like a 60 bushel field. You can see here really good pod set. Anywhere from the number of seeds per pod can range anywhere from from 5 to 8 is pretty common. And then here we're seeing some very good numbers there. This field is only 2 miles away from the original fields the first picture I showed you. It's a lower field. Again, this is pretty obvious. We're not going to have much here. We're only at 16 bushels an acre here, and it looks very poor. And you can see here almost no pods on there, maybe 1 or 2, and maybe only a couple of seeds. The reason I kind of put these pictures up here, there are yield calculators that you can find. NDSU does have a yield calculator out there. The problem is that the peas are so variable within the field with the number of pods and with the number of seeds per pod. It's really hard to get a good estimation. And the reason I show those pictures initially, I think probably the best way to give a yield estimate on peas is more experience. There are really no good calculators. Well, I guess maybe the calculators, there's no fault of the calculators. It's more the sampling that gets done, because you have to know plant population. You have to have a really good idea on how many pods per plant, and that means taking a lot of samples and looking at the seeds as well. So I think probably a better estimation is just by experience is probably the way I typically do it, because I've tried yield calculators. I even tried one for this little exercise, and I was going to add that in, but when it was all said and done, the yields were just outrageously high. So that's my answer today, and I'm sticking to it. So.
Okay, that's good actually, and I just got a question that come in for you, Dennis. I'm just going, well, it's a question on peas, so I'm gonna just keep asking it here.
Yep.
Looking at my peas, at what stage should I start looking at pre-harvest?
Oh, that's an interesting. So the stage you got to start to be looking at pre-harvest is when you have that 85% leaf drop, and the seed should be starting to turn already. So we're probably not quite there yet. But in some areas, if they're early enough, we're probably going to be there. Like if we're looking at the calendar here, we're going to be there in the next couple of weeks. The one thing to look at, and I don't know if I can find it real quick here, but on the if you go to the Keeping It Clean website, they actually have a staging guide for peas for staging peas. And I'll see if I can find it here real quick. And oops. But there is and maybe what I'll do is I'll pull it up here, and if you want to go to another question, I'll bring it up, and then we can talk about it again after. So.
Okay, and just an add-on to that question was what products should they be looking at using? So
yeah,
you
okay.
can look that
I'll deal with that all at the same time. Yeah. So.
Great. Okay, Lori, if you could bring the screen back to me, and then we'll come back to Dennis in a couple minutes here. Okay, thanks, Lori. And in case people are noticing the two little guys on the peas there, that's the larvae for a lady beetle, and they're just enjoying the aphids. Okay, this question is over the past week, I've seen pictures or samples of oats coming in with empty florets in the panicle, and I've seen this on Twitter, and I've also seen it in a producer's field when he was asking me about it. So I did forward the question to Anne. Anne isn't able to be with us, but she was able to answer the question for me yesterday. And she was thinking there's could be a few things that have happened. It's usually related to some type of stress that causes that floret not to fill, and in most years it's usually related to heat that causes that, but also moisture stress can cause it as well. So I can see where in some cases this year around low-lying areas that have been in water for some time period, we might see some of that happening. And the other thing that could be happening is we could be seeing some damage or some physical damage, and we definitely had some storm systems come through that were fairly strong winds. In some cases we had winds with fairly small hail, so we could see some of that damage happening that way. So if you're seeing some white panicles showing up in your oats, that could be the reason why they're there. Okay, next question is going to go to John Hurd, and this is an update from where we had the question last week regarding applying nitrogen after anthesis to get increased protein. And John had found some extra work here on flag leaf burn. And so I'll turn it over to John right now. I think he's on the phone with us, right?
Okay. Hi, Lionel. Yes, thanks for that. This is kind of the chat that you have with the grower after they've 3 to 5 days after applying some of these foliar treatments to enhance protein. We frequently do see leaf burn occurring, and I don't know if you had the slides in there of the amount of leaf burn, but in the 20 some odd studies that we did on farm tests and numerous small plot studies, we did see that we typically get anywhere from 5 to 15% of that flag leaf with some burn injury on it. And if that was herbicides, well, then Tammy's phone would ring off the wall. If it was a disease, then you would be having your fungicide sales rep out. But really, the consequence on yield is very slight. when we've done that, in only one case in our on-farm test did we have measurable yield loss. And that was when we broke the rules. That is when the post-synthesis nitrogen treatment was applied at 3 in the afternoon on a day that was hot as a pistol. And there we had up to 31% leaf burn, and we reduced the yield. I'm going to give you the numbers here, from 65 bushels the acre down to 59. So even though we'd taken off 31% of the flag leaf, there was a 6 bushel yield loss. In all the other cases, you know, we've had one example here at Homewood, caused 10% leaf burn, and the yield was at 97 bushels the acre with no nitrogen, and it stayed at 97 bushels the acre. So it's largely cosmetic, but it is the type of thing that you'll lose some sleep over. So I think it's just something that growers need to be aware of, that we can cause that leaf burn, and surprising to all, it seems to have very minimal yield impact. And the type of, I guess one of our frustrations is the increase in protein that we get with this treatment varies. One of these slides that you had on the screen there, we saw an increase in protein of 1.5%. In other cases, there was a negligible increase in protein. It was pretty unpredictable for us as to know how much of an increase we were going to get. On average, about 0.6 to 0.7 increase in protein. So that's all I have to say about that.
Okay, so I just looking at the one slide here where you were talking about the following PAN guidelines. I think we did maybe mention this and maybe one of the previous webinars, but I think the big key is avoiding the heat of the day, I think is what you're getting at, right?
Yeah, most of our growers were applying in the evening, and that seems to be the safety margin, as well as, you know, making sure you've got the 50-50 dilution with water. Oh, now I should mention that in one of the research plots, studies that Amy Magé and Don Flayton continued on, they also did it using the dissolved urea, which some people call melted urea, but it was basically dissolved urea. They actually saw less leaf burn and got some higher protein. We know from European work that it tends to be more popular over there. But Amy was speculating that some of that is just because the dissolved urea is more dilute. There's more water per pounds of nitrogen going on. So it may just be the dilution factor that reduced burn or helped reduce the burn.
Okay, and John, while I have you on, the question regarding sulfur deficiency in canola and what can be done, if you wanted to make a few comments on that.
Well, I wish we were maybe seeing this a couple of weeks ago. But anyways, rescue treatments can work. At this point, if you have sulfur deficiency in canola, it's probably showing up as that pale yellow or delayed flowering. And I've just sent out to 3 agronomists this past week the guidelines on some rescue treatments, but it is getting pretty darn late for that. So if we do see it at this case, work out of Saskatchewan several years ago, yes, I know you have the slide up there now showing that, yes, you don't get full yield recovery, but it was still very profitable to apply some sulfur at the early flowering stage. Now, I think most of your crops, from what you were telling us, Lionel, your crops have advanced beyond that, and as they advance beyond, I think we're chasing something we can't catch at this stage. But if we have been able to get on a sulfate form followed by rain in order to take that into the soil so we get root uptake, there was still some pretty good economics to rescuing or salvaging that crop. But as we chug along, it's going to be harder and harder to pull that crop back at this point. Should mention that growers, there's an increasing number of elemental sulfur fertilizers being tested and promoted, and those are the ones where growers will want to monitor those fields closely. Some of the new research showing that of sulfur recovery in the crop was showing, over 65% of the sulfate sulfur being shown up in the crop, something less than 20% if it used elemental sulfur. We've known this like forever, but we are watching. There continue to be developments in the elemental sulfur formulation world, and we keep hoping that we'll make improvements on those type of values. But those are the cases where a grower using elemental sulfur would want to be watching closely how his crop is responding, so he still does have time for one of those rescue treatments.
Okay, thanks, John. While I have you on, and you sent me an email today, and I've been seeing it quite a bit in the field this year, and producers are starting to wonder what they can do. Is we're seeing what I always say, it's their tractor and air seeder tracks that are causing a waving effect in the field, and we get it comes up either faster or later, and it's you can definitely see all the tracks. And is there something, and the question I always get, is there something we can do about that to improve that? And it seems changing the air seeder or changing the tire, the kind of tires isn't really the answer. So what are your comments on that?
Well, my suggestion are that all farmers, if they are on a paved road, that they should seed perpendicular to it so that the neighbors can't see those wheel tracks all summer. So that's the first thing you do. But it's ugly, Lionel. When we do traffic or tillage in wet conditions, which we have, we can set ourselves up for those types of cloddy or compacted conditions. And this year seems to be one that's worse than others. The folks, corn growers have coined the term tall corn, short corn. That is the symptomology that you get from soil compaction. You'll get some plants that get roots through voids and cracks and do quite well, and you'll have plants right beside it that are stunted and weak because they just happen to be in some, a highly compacted lug or track. And it's the variability that you get in those compacted areas that tends to make it look so ugly. What we can do, yes, I guess there's proper tire inflations and possibly tracks. Our friend Marla Rickman is more the expert on this than I am.
I'm here, John.
Oh,
yeah,
well,
Marla's here too, so if she could chime in, that would be great.
Okay, Marla, I set the stage for you.
Oh no, that was good. Thank you. No, I just first of all, I wanted to add to when you were talking about the tall corn, short corn issue, that we don't always know what that yield effect will be. Otherwise, you just kind of assume that there will be a yield effect. But Jody DeYoung-Hughes at the University of Minnesota has actually looked at that and found a 17% decrease in yield in those tracked areas. And so it can be significant, and it also depends then on how many of those tracks you have in the field. So how much area of the field is affected, and having that resulted, potential 17% decrease. And that decrease could be bigger or smaller depending on the year. And like you said, this was a bad year. Where we see a lot more of those ruts and potential compacted areas, because the reality is we were on the field earlier than we should be based on soil moisture, not earlier than we should be based on wanting to get on the field and get the crop in the ground, considering how late seeding was getting going this year. And the tracks thing versus tires, I think I often ask this question when I talk about compaction in extension message meetings. How many farmers are actually checking their tire pressure when they're getting to the field to make sure that the tires are run at their rated pressure for field conditions? And that's not something that is always getting done. Your tire pressures are much higher for road travel than it is for field travel. And so trying to get people to think a little bit about that can have some effect on the compaction impact, and often can actually cause less slippage and such when your tires are run at their rated pressures, because they actually have the proper grip that's required to travel through bad kind of trafficking situations or wetter soils. Tracks, again, can cause a little less slippage, but don't necessarily give less compaction on the soil versus tires or duals run at their rated pressure.
Okay, and so is there something that could be done in this fall? Let's say if a producer noticed that in his field now, and is there something he should look at doing this fall to maybe improve the soil conditions in those areas?
Yeah, so when managing for compaction, it's really a long-term thing and really hard to kind of fix in a short term without something like tillage. The problem with if you decided to subsoil or do some deep ripping to try to break up those compacted areas, you have to have ideal conditions for it. And that means extremely dry soils that are near wilting point. So not done in a fall where we've had a lot of rain. So the problem becomes if we have dry enough soils to subsoil the soils properly, at that point, with a lot of our clay soils, they've probably naturally cracked open. If you're finding soils with those big deep cracks in them, or you're noticing cracks at the surface, that's actually Mother Nature starting to subsoil for you and opening that soil up a little bit. You could consider getting into just soil building strategies over the long term. Short term, it's a really hard thing to manage. Yes, deep tillage can help to break that up, but I'm very cautious when recommending that, because unless you have perfect dry conditions to the depth that you're tilling, you're actually just going to cause more problems over the long run.
Marla, I might just mention for the viewers or on CropTalk here that are certified crop advisors, they get the Crops and Soils magazine, and the May-June article had a North Dakota article in there, and they summarized a lot of the deep ripping, and they suggested it benefits crop yields 25% of the time, no effect 50% of the time, and negative 25% of the time. So anyways, they have a nice article, and you've covered a lot of those facts in your commentary here, Marla.
Yeah, thanks, John. I often too, I will say the same thing. Like, I can see it go bad as often as I see it go good with subsoiling. So the problem with subsoiling is, yes, while if say you have a compacted soil around headlands or areas that have water's just not flowing through those, opening that soil up and allowing that water to move downwards can actually help to decrease some of the water ponding and salinity problems. But remember that when you open the soil up to allow water to move down, sometimes you're also opening the soil up to allow water to move up, which could bring up more salinity problems and more issues. So I'm glad that they saw that, because that kind of moves along or goes along with what we generally see is sometimes it works and sometimes it doesn't. Sometimes it might just have a very short-term effect, but not be a proper or better kind of long-term solution.
Okay, thanks, John and Marla. That was a good answer for that question. I think maybe we'll check with Dennis now to see if he's able to put the question or the answer together for the question on peas.
Yes, it was. So if you can show my screen again, that would be wonderful. Alrighty. So as I started to talk about before, what you need to do is you need to be in that 80% yellow to golden brown pods, And those lower pods, the seeds should already be detached already. This one is always a little bit of an interesting one. You want to be kind of in and around that 30% moisture, but it's really hard to tell at that stage. But really what you're looking for, those pods should be, majority of those pods, 80% should be that golden brown. As far as the products to use, if you're looking for a desiccant, right now, one of the first things you should do is check with your buyer, because some buyers have restrictions on which products you can use. Heat seems to be the more common one that growers are using now, and heat on its own. Regulon's had some issues with some buyers, so if you are considering that option, maybe check with your buyer beforehand to make sure there's no restrictions there. Now, a couple other things to kind of keep in mind is, and it's a little different in the what I call the flats or the Red River Valley versus the western side of the province. Last year we had some fields in this area that didn't get sprayed with any kind of desiccant because there was, they were maturing relatively evenly. There was a few small green seeds still hanging on, but with the hot weather that we had, they matured quite nicely in the field. Some growers took it off a little early, and as long as there was some seed color change on those green seeds, they changed normally in the bin. So overall, they matured on their own. And in the west, sometimes you have more hills and valleys, so you may see maybe a little bit more desiccation going on in peas out in that area. If you have some weed challenges in the field, and you need to look at a pre-harvest management tool like glyphosate to help manage the weed control, I guess, in that field, there are some restrictions with some of the buyers there as well. So again, just keep in mind that you really have to be aware of for all crops nowadays, peas and beans, just making sure that whatever product you choose to use on it is okay with the buyer that you're working with.
Okay, thanks, Dennis. Real good points regarding contacting the buyer as well. Okay, so I got one more question, and I don't have a slide for it, but it was a producer that wanted to know, and I'm going to, I guess, address this one to David. The producer wanted to know, he didn't spray for disease in his canola, and he's just wanting to, I guess, monitor his field, and what would be some of the ways he could kind of go out there and kind of keep on top of what's going on.
Okay, Lionel, thanks. There are various ways that you can determine whether or not it was the right decision. And most of them involve going into the crop and looking at it and looking for evidence that there is Sclerotinia infection. It manifests in many different ways. And especially in the upper part of the canopy, if you see any watery decay on upper leaves, that's an indication that Sclerotinia is there, but may or may not have a big impact on the crop. After you've seen something like that, you'd be examining further down within the plant and looking for evidence of whitish fungal growth on the surface of the stems and branches. And if you see that, shortly thereafter, you should begin to see drying and shredding of the stem. And once you get to that stage, you might open stems and find sclerotia, the resting bodies developing already within the stem. The further down the stem infection is, the greater the impact on that individual plant. So right near the base, you're probably going to lose all yield from that. And if you have a thin stand, the plants around have not filled in that area, you're missing yield. But if you had a thin stand, maybe it was the right decision to not spend money on fungicide anyway. What else? Lionel, are there things that I haven't covered or that Dane might have said about the same situation?
I think you've covered them all, David. And I guess one point I'd like to make is that if you are in a situation where you didn't spray or or even if you did spray, I guess we are doing the canola disease surveys, and if you have a field that you would like somebody to check, if you let us know, probably could let us know through the email, and I can get that information on to Dane, and if we could work the field in, we would definitely work it in on our canola disease survey. But yeah, no, David, I think you covered pretty much all the points as to what to look for in the field. So thanks, David.
And that's a great suggestion, Lionel. We can't evaluate yield potential at this point, but certainly we can put some eyes on the ground, practicing proper biosecurity, of course. If a grower asks and wants to be included in the survey, we'll see if they're in an area that we will be exploring. We try to base our provincial surveillance on the intensity of the crop production in that particular area. So some RMs we survey up to 4 fields. In others, we might not be surveying any, but we would consider being invited to a field of special interest. So that invitation is out there.
Great. Okay, thanks, David.
Yep.
Okay, so just a few more slides for today. Just want to, I guess, again, mention the Crop Diagnostic School still going on and getting close to the end. It's on till August the 7th, sorry. And if you're interested in attending, there's the link with all the information. So go there and you'll be able to listen to a lot of the specialists talking about different issues with crop production. Our field crop guide still available at the ag offices. Our seasonal reports are definitely something to still be going to and watching. I know I definitely keep an eye on the weather reports. The insect and disease updates are great. So some of the diseases are starting to, I guess, be done for the year, but definitely go there to get updates. The Farm Production Extension Specialists in the province, there we are. If you've got questions, please feel free to contact any one of them. And that does it for today. Join us next week, July 29th. Last week in July. Things are going by fast. Thanks for attending.